Alright, so welcome to Unit 1 review here, Geographic Basic Concepts. I do apologize, my voice is a little raspy. I filmed this video already twice. My computer at school kind of crapped out on me a little bit, so I have to redo this video in order to upload it to you guys. So, I'm going with my South gear this week for homecoming, so that's why I'm decked out this way. So here we go. Geographic basic concepts you guys need to know, just basics about geography. What is geography? Essentially, just remember it's a study of where things are and why they're there. Human geographers always ask those two questions. Where is something located? Agriculture, population. And why is that agriculture there? Why is that population there? Just always asking those two questions. So it's not even just human geography that asks those questions, but it could also be regular geography as well. You know, where are their mountains? How did they get there? It's more physical geography, but still, it's a sense of inquiry that they're always asking those two kind of basic questions throughout. Now, so the two differences between, or the one main difference between human geography and physical geography is just essentially what have humans done on the earth. So as you can see here, this is kind of all natural. This was natural until humans got kind of control of it, and now you can kind of see the human kind of input on the land there with the terraces. But again, human geography is simply just the human way of life or the human culture or the human imprint on the earth. Moving now on, again, the difference between geography and history, the where and why for geography, whereas history asks kind of when did it happen and why did it happen. It's more of chronological order, and geography is more organized, more spatially across the earth. So they would kind of look at a timeline in history. In geography, we're going to kind of look at a map and see kind of where things are happening and where they are not in the world. So now, a map is going to be the geographer's basic tool. All geographers are going to use maps. Remember, there's two kinds of maps. One is going to be a reference map or a reference tool to find out where something is in the world. Okay, so where is New York City? Okay, where are the cities in New York City? If you're looking to get somewhere, okay, or where something is, that is going to be a reference point, a reference map. The other thing we use it for is more commonly a communications tool. So what communication or what idea are we trying to communicate from one person to another? So obviously down here, we have kind of diabetes rates per county in New York City. You could do crime rates, you could do agriculture, you could do languages around the world as well. Any idea you're trying to communicate, that would be a communication map. Now, so I'm going to go over this kind of twice. What is geographic scale? This is basically scale of analysis. Geographic scale is basically what scale are you looking at? Are you looking at kind of a global or national scale? Whoa, sorry there. Or are you looking more towards a city scale? Now, this isn't the same thing as large or small kind of map. This is more of what are geographers looking at. All right. So geographic scale or scale of analysis is deciding what we are going to look at. So if we were to look at, the cancer rates in the United States, we do a U.S. map, city map for Baltimore, state map for Maryland. All right. Just don't get all these scales kind of confused. I'll try to break them down as simple as possible for each one. So kind of the father of this kind of geography thing is going to be Eratosthenes. Basically, he's considered kind of the first geographer because he came up with the term geography. Simply keep on remembering, geo means world and graphy means to write. So together, you're going to be writing about the world or studying about the world. Just keep in mind, he was the first one to kind of use that term. He's not the first one to truly ask where and why, but he's the first one to kind of put that term together that we know today. All right, so now we're going to kind of look at the grid system. This is mainly the longitude, latitude. Just remember that the grid system is a mathematical calculation. There's math involved in dividing up the world into all the degrees, longitude, latitudes. It is essentially an equation. There is a rhyme and reason to it, so it's definitely going to be a little bit more mathematical. For longitude, again, kind of the key for me is looking at the G there, knowing that the lines go the long way here, kind of up and down, if you will, per se. But the first one you always want to make for this is the prime meridian, which is going to be 0 degrees. And as soon as you draw that line, you're going to know anything to the left or right is going to be measuring west and east. So as soon as you draw that first line, the next one you draw would be to the west. One on the other side would be to the east. Okay. Again, these are also known as meridians. So longitude lines are also known as meridians. Again, you have the prime meridian at 0 degrees. And then when you move all the way to the other side of the world to 180 degrees, that's going to be more of the international date line, which switches the dates in the world for you. Just a rough estimate, time zones kind of follow this pretty closely. Every 15 degrees, roughly is going to be a time zone. And again, the Earth is 24,000 miles around roughly. Therefore, we have 24 hours kind of in the day and 24 time zones to kind of break that into. Now moving on kind of to latitude. Again, remember for me, the T kind of denotes that the lines are going to go left to right. Lines are going left to right. But as soon as you make that first left or right line on the equator here, all right, the next line is going to be to the north or the south. The north or the south. These are a little different. The highest it goes is to 90 degrees, and the lowest it goes, again, is to 70 degrees as well. Also keep in mind the equator is going to be the longest parallel around the world. All right, the shortest parallels that's going to travel the least amount of distance are going to be at the poles. So like 85, 89 degrees are going to be really short around the Earth. Same thing down here. The equator goes this entire way around the Earth, 24,000 miles. Keep in mind this region here is going to be the tropic regions here. We have our Tropic of Capricorn. It's going to be in the south, and our Tropic of Cancer, which is going to be a little bit more in the north. Remember when we talk about high latitude, okay, that's going to be more colder places, and low latitude is going to be more warm environments. Again, don't get this kind of confused with altitude. So now moving on, practice. Please make sure you do that practice sheet, or at least a couple of them, so you guys make sure you guys got it down. Check my answers on Blackboard just to double check to make sure. There is going to be quite a few questions kind of on longitude, latitude, or the basics of it on the assessment for you. All right, so now we're going to move on to here map projections. Remember, a projection is simply taking the globe and then putting it onto a map, okay, or a 2D object. So map projection, none of them are correct. Keep that in mind, and they all lie. So all maps lie. But a projection is just simply the process of taking a globe and putting it onto a flat surface, okay? We refer to kind of these projections as simply maps. Again, remember the people who make maps are cartographers, pretty basic. And again, the kind of the art or the science behind this kind of map making is going to be called cartography. So again, why do all maps lie? Remember, all lie, it's because they're sad, all right? Shape, okay? Sometimes the shape can be distorted. Instead of looking like a long country, it could be short and kind of wide. Area, where you basically take the size of it and you make it much smaller or much bigger. Distance between two places can kind of be distorted. Remember, on any map, kind of when you normally look at it, California looks really far away from Asia, where in fact they're kind of the closest kind of to for us, as opposed to where you have New York City and you're looking at Asia. All right. On a regular map, they're going to look pretty close, but if you actually make it into a globe, all right, distance is kind of distorted for there. And then direction. So depend on how they outlay the map there. Okay, the direction you go could also be distorted. If you know better and you know it's a globe, that's one thing. But a map is not always going to have perfect direction for you. So the first one we're going to look at is a traditional Mercator map. This Mercator map, the reason you know, once you get to higher latitudes here, all right, these higher latitudes is going to stretch Greenland out a little bit. All right, it's going to stretch Antarctica out and make it look much bigger. So how do I identify a Mercator map? Simply look at Greenland, compare it to Africa. And this one here, this kind of Mercator projection, they look roughly the same size. And what is the distort? Clearly the size, okay, and the shape a little bit are distorted for a Mercator map. Now again, this is used for navigation, so it keeps distance and direction pretty even. So if I leave on this line here, I'm pretty much going to end up on this line over here as long as I can follow that coordinate. Remember, this is more for sailors back in the day. That was kind of the benefit of the Mercator. We just kept using it for years and years longer than we probably should have. The next one is the Robinson projection. This is the one you're going to see kind of on my wall there. In school, this is nothing is perfect on this map. There's nothing correct. It distorts everything a little bit, but it's more of a compromise. So you're never going to see anything perfect on this map, all right? But you will see that it looks pretty much close to kind of the size, shape, distance, direction as the globe would per se. So again, the way I remember it is it kind of has those two kind of rounded edges, but it also has two flat kind of edges as well. Now the next one we're going to look at is the Gale-Peters. This is the one you guys saw in that video where they accidentally, or not accidentally on purpose, they shifted it upside down to kind of really throw you guys off here. But this really distorts shape. Greenland looks really kind of short and kind of fattened out. South America and Africa are a little more elongated there, but it does preserve area, which means size. So this is truly the square footage or size in relation to Africa or relative to Africa, which would be a little bit more correct. As you can kind of see, Alaska is roughly now the same size as Mexico, which is more in line with what it kind of really is. Where you look at the Mercator map, Alaska looks really big. Okay, so now how to identify it? Look for those elongations, and then at the poles, things kind of start squishing up a little bit more. Now the good one, again, remember there's two O's in good. I kind of consider this kind of an O, and this is kind of an O as well. The negative behind this is that it does split up the world here. Look at Greenland now here. It's kind of one half is here and one half is there. Some people like this because it preserves everything else. Okay, so distance is kind of distorted because it's not really this far from point A to point B over here. All right, but it distorts that. But size and land area are pretty much preserved in this one. So this is kind of the true size of Africa compared to the United States. Again, how do you identify it? It kind of looks like an orange peel, or you can kind of go with the O method that I kind of use for myself. Now the next one, we're starting getting these funky ones. You have the polar one. It could be down from the South Pole or the North Pole. It does not matter which way it is. This is also called the azimuthal kind of projection as well. But basically it's a bird's eye view. Airlines use this a lot because going from the United States, you're not actually going to go all the way over here this way. You're just going to go from the United States up over the North Pole into Russia if that's where your destination was. So again, how do you identify it? Just look at more of a bird's eye view. What's in the center? All right, you can always see that it's a pole. If the pole's in the center, it's going to be a polar type map. All right, the last kind of projection we're going to look at are kind of two different projections, but they're basically the same concept. Butterfly and Dymaxion. This is where they're trying to keep everything in the world kind of together, right? As long as the land and kind of oceans are kind of touching each other. They don't want to break up the Earth continents kind of too much. It's kind of the benefit of this map, but it really distorts direction and distance. Okay, again, it's not really this far from South America to Africa. And the directions are pretty much skewed as well here. You wouldn't head to South America and then go all the way this way to get to Africa. You would just kind of go this route. But this map kind of really distorts that. Now remember, the way I remember it is butterfly looks like a butterfly, and the one that doesn't look like a butterfly but it's all broken up is a Dymaxion. That's the simplest way to kind of use that, is Dymaxion is more triangle based, and the butterfly definitely looks like a butterfly shape. Okay, so now that you have your map projection, you want to decide what you're going to use your map for, what the purpose of the map is. Remember, there's two purposes for a map. You're going to have communication, you're going to have reference. But as soon as you get your map, the first thing you want to do is notice if it's a large scale map or a small scale map. Remember, large is large amount of detail, small scale is a small amount of detail. So if you get a world map that's going to have a really, really small amount of detail, you're not going to see the streets, you're not going to see the roads. Okay, a large scale map might be something like a county or a city or a neighborhood. Okay, the larger of these two is going to be kind of here the regional map of southeastern and northeastern Illinois. Remember, small scale map, small detail, large scale map, large amount of detail. So now when we get to the maps, there's going to be a couple different reference maps. You have a physical map, which is just going to show you the physical layout of the earth, where you're going to have mountains, where you're going to have prairies, where you're going to have grasslands. Then you're going to have political. Political map does not mean actually politics. It just simply means where are the borders of the states, where are the borders of the countries, what's the capital, what's the major cities. Now use these to find where you are going. Remember, reference map. So where are the mountains? Where are the cities? Topographical map is going to show you kind of the elevation. It's going to use the ISO lines as well here, as we're kind of familiar with. Just remember, topographical is going to show you elevation and the distance between a high point and kind of a low point. And then you're going to have road maps as well. Again, remember, all these reference maps just show you how to get to a certain place or where certain places are. Now, the ones we're going to kind of look at are going to be more of the thematic maps. Remember, a thematic map focuses on a theme or a topic that it's trying to convey. Make sure when you see a thematic map, you always look for the topic. So the topic on this one is going to be personal income per capita. Excuse me. And also remember that per capita, again, means simply per person or on average per person. So our first thematic map that we're going to look at is going to be kind of the most commonly used one, is a choropleth map. So the variation of colors. All right, dark red means one color or one item, so thefts per vehicle, 81 to 235. Okay, and then you're going to switch it up to 759 to 1128 for this kind of really light orange reddish kind of color. Okay, these can always vary. It doesn't always have to be a national map. It could be a world map as well. Just remember that the color means one item. Usually, darker means more and lighter means less on most cases. So now we're going to have the dot density map, which is going to be kind of our second thematic map. Remember, each dot represents the same amount. Okay, if a different size dot comes in, that's not a dot density map. So every dot means something. It could mean 1 or it can mean a million, it can mean 10,000. It does not matter. Just remember, one dot always equals the same when you look at the map. Now, the very kind of similar one to this is going to be proportional symbol map. So the bigger the symbol, the more whatever the item is, okay? And the smaller it is, the less amount. So remember, you can see one per state on this one, but it does not always mean it's going to be one per state. You could have cities be represented by this. You could have different regions be represented by this. So you could actually have more than one symbol per state, but keep in mind that the proportion of the symbol represents the amount. So traffic fatalities in the United States, I'm not even going to actually kind of look at these numbers, but instantly, just by looking at the map, you can tell it's going to be Texas and California. And then smaller amounts here are going to be kind of in the Rocky Mountain states, usually probably because they have less population. This is also again known as a graduated symbol map. So remember, proportion or graduated symbol, it gradually gets bigger and bigger or smaller and smaller, depending which way you look at it. So other type of line, excuse me, line map that we're going to look at is the flow line. This definitely is used for more trade and more migration maps. Again, the bigger these flow lines means a more amount. So the ones on here kind of have the coming in, coming out together. As you can kind of see on this one, the United States has a big green one kind of going to Canada, which means we send a lot of items to Canada. Okay, but if you look at China coming to the United States, China sends a lot of items from their place to our place. And then finally we have the ISO line map. Again, so we have our two kind of line maps. The ISO line simply ignores all kind of boundaries per se. So wherever something is, that's how it's going to kind of flow. So this is temperature, kind of showing you where the temperature kind of changes kind of throughout the United States on average there. This could also be used very well for kind of languages. You can have those ISO line maps where they kind of ignore borders, especially in parts of Asia and in Europe where languages don't always just follow country boundaries. The final one we're going to have is a cartogram. This is the one that bothers you guys a lot. The shapes try staying their kind of same kind of shape, but the size changes based on the volume. The negative part about this map is something with really small volume, you can totally completely ignore it. You might not even see it. And something that is kind of small in size, but has a large amount, might be really distorted, might be harder to see. But it's a good graphic to kind of show you just on this map here. This is last year's election. You can clearly see kind of who voted for Clinton. It's going to be more on the coastal part, and then kind of like the main heartland part of the United States in the south, definitely leaning towards more Donald Trump. Alright, so remember that the cartogram always doesn't have to look like the kind of bubbly, kind of smooth shape. It can also be broken down into squares. This entire cartogram, the sizes are determined by little kind of squares. Each square kind of represents a certain amount of population kind of in the world. So now we're moving on to the different kind of scales that you'll see on a map. So remember, ratio or fraction scale, the one simply means one item, it could be a pen, means 24,000 pens or pencils on that map. Okay, so if it's a 1 to 12 scale, every one pencil in real life is going to mean, or one pencil on the map, sorry, is going to mean 12 pencils in real life. So a 1 to 24,000 simply means when you measure that one pen or item, whatever item it is, it doesn't have to be a pencil. All right, in real life, it'll take you 24,000 of those to get from point A to point B on the end of that measurement. The second one's pretty straightforward. Written scale is just simply written out for you. 3 inches equals 10 miles, 1 inch equals 1 mile. They don't have the ratio, they don't have the fractions. Okay, it just simply tells you, hey, you need to find 1 inch, and when you find that 1 inch, it can mean 2 miles, it can mean 5 kilometers, whatever. And the final kind of scale is a graphic scale where you actually have to go up to the map and you're going to have to measure, hey, this amount here, okay, is going to be 2 miles or 3 miles. So you're going to have 1 mile here, 2 miles here, and basically you just kind of measure it out on the map, that's 2 miles. This is kind of what you guys probably have done on a lot of maps before, especially a lot of like maybe standardized tests where they tell you how far is something on here and they give you like one of these kind of scale things. This is probably what you've kind of always done before. Now we're going to look at kind of geospatial technologies. We kind of went over these rather quickly in class, but I think you guys got the hang of this. Remember, GPS, you're going to have at least 3 satellites to kind of pinpoint your coordination there. This is good for tracking where something is. So even if you take a photo of something and you want to know exactly where that is, or if you find some sort of rare plant or species, you'd want to record where it is. This can also get you from point A to point B pretty fast. This has also helped a lot of land disputes around the country and around the world as well. So moving on to GIS, remember this is a computer system that has all this data laid into it. All right, once you have all the data on that computer system, now you can add this layer and this layer and this layer, and you then can kind of see patterns or not patterns, depending on kind of what you're looking for. Remember, this is kind of the disease activity we did in class, the outbreak activity where you guys had the streets and you guys had the people that were sick, okay, and you were trying to make some sort of association with one layer with the other layer. Next one is going to be any kind of surface reading, whether it's urbanization, spread of cities, whether it's flooding, whether it's loss of trees, deforestation, desertification, whatever it is, okay, as long as it's measuring the surface, what's there, what's not there, is it getting bigger, is it getting smaller, that is going to be remote sensing. Remember, GPS is telling you where something is. Remote sensing is kind of measuring what is kind of going on at the surface. And the final one is just online mapping, which you guys are pretty much familiar with. The textbook calls them mashups. Either one, online mapping or mashups, are pretty much going to be the same thing. All right, so our next topic here is going to be place. Keep in mind, place is basically anything that is in there, or where you go somewhere, everything that makes it up. The site characteristics, the physical characteristics, situational characteristics, the toponyms, anything you see, hear, touch, feel, anything you experience in that area, all right, or that location is what's going to make that location essentially a place. So think about what you would see, hear, touch, feel when you're in New York City. That's going to make it a place, which is going to be different than your experience when you go to Waukesha. All right, so now keep in mind, sense of place is simply how you feel, what do you associate with that place. So when you think of your hometown, what makes it different than every other hometown? What do they have that another place does not have? So you don't want to think about more McDonald's, you want to think more of like unique type culture things. Remember Waukesha, think about like Les Paul, think about the old city hall, think about things named Spring City around the city, think about all the foxes that are around. You're not really going to see all those kind of characteristics in another place, especially kind of when you start thinking about kind of the toponym as well. Milwaukee, again, they identify themselves as a sense of place with the architecture there, the local architecture, the teams that are involved there, okay, the team names, what everything kind of represents. That is going to be your sense of place. Now, the first thing for kind of a place per se is going to be a toponym, basically the name of a place. It could be a state, it could be a park, it could be a city. But remember what all these names kind of derive from, especially in North America. They're the names of the founders. There could be religious influence, which is going to tell you a lot about the people that came there first. Local features, if they have a lake nearby or a river or some kind of waterfall, they normally embed that into the name somehow. Or colonial origins, where you can kind of see based on that name or what language that kind of toponym is in, kind of where those original people kind of came from as well. Absolute location. This is going to be a math location. Remember, longitude, latitude is going to be your absolute location. Another example of an absolute location is going to be your address. So whatever your street address is, that's an absolute That's an absolute location. Nobody else has that location. Nobody else is going to be in the longitude, latitude you are at. Okay? If you give someone that, they're absolutely going to find you. Now, the one that they're not going to find you per se, remember, this is relative location, very similar to situation. Okay, they're very, very similar to each other. Relative location just simply means an area that is kind of in a general area. So I live on east side of town or the west side of town, or I live over by, you can say you live over by Arby's, you live over by Target, all right? Wherever you kind of live, you don't really always give that address. You put it in relation to something else, okay? So you don't simply live river, you simply live on one side of the river or another side of the river or the east side or the west side or an opposite from another spot. So have relative location, you have to reference one spot to where you want somebody to be or somewhere to kind of find you. Now remember, site characteristics, this is all physical features, okay? So these buildings in New York City are not site features. The island of Manhattan is going to be a site feature, okay? The two rivers is going to be a site feature. The fact that it's flat, the weather, the temperature, that is going to be site features. Okay, so anything physical geography related, that's the site features. If you want to talk about resources they have there, like the Middle East, that is going to be the part of the site features as well. Now, when you start looking at situation, this is the same thing as kind of the relative location. What situation? What makes it successful? What makes it kind of going downhill? When we looked at Singapore, remember, it's in close relation to Southeast Asia, cheap labor, and it's also really close to the ocean, so therefore they can get a lot of stuff made there, send it out from Singapore, do a lot of trading with all the ports they have there because they have good access to the oceans, which are going to allow them to send ships to Africa, Europe, North America, South America, and other parts of Asia as well. Remember, the good thing about Istanbul, we kind of looked at before, the good situation that it's in. It's in between these two major seas. It's also in the crossroads between Europe and the Middle East and the rest of Asia. So people would always travel through here. this way and kind of this way as well. They would make a lot of profit because people were coming through. They would charge a lot of people kind of coming through, and all their people that had trading items could just stay there. Then when people passed through, they always got to make a lot of profit because they were always kind of trading. So that's going to be a situation. Now, cultural landscape is basically looking at the landscape and seeing kind of the culture of the local people. How have they altered it? How have they changed it in relation to kind of the culture? We have these terraces here. We can kind of figure out kind of what these people eat just simply by looking at kind of the cultural landscape. What have they done to the landscape? Terracing is pretty common for rice rice growing, especially in hilly regions because they don't have kind of the flat land to do it, so they terrace it. Down here you can kind of see the religious cultural influence and kind of for their culture how they want to take care of the people that pass away. They don't want to cremate them, they want to bury them, but they're having kind of flooding issues in New Orleans all the time, so they bury them above ground. But you can kind of see the religious influence on that cultural landscape as well. So now we're quickly going to go into regions here. Remember, a region is simply many places defined by a very similar characteristic, right? The more characteristics you have, technically it's going to be kind of a stronger region. You're not really going to measure what's kind of a stronger region. Just know that more similar characteristics is going to make it definitely a stronger region, like, quote, kind of the South. First region we're going to look at is a formal region or a uniform region. Remember, uniform means uniformity. Everybody there is going to be sharing, or most people there are going to be sharing in on kind of some sort of characteristic. Now, when you look at these formal regions, laws, languages are really good for formal regions when you can kind of see a cut boundary. One of the questions I asked you guys on the quiz was about one of the languages towards, English speaking towards Texas. And when you see that gradual thing there, all right, the gradual of going from English to Spanish, that's not going to be a formal region because you don't really see those clear-cut borders. So think of borders for formal region and think of most people there or an abundance of people share that very common characteristic. Now, the next one we're going to look at is going to be the functional or nodal region. Now remember, sports teams are not all functional regions. This map is showing you that it's a functional region, right? This is not the Twins region because not everybody there is a Twins fan. You can kind of see the node there, and further you get away, the less and less. The better ones to use for this one is thinking about kind of that central place idea. TV stations, the further you get away, the signal goes out. The radio station, further you get away, the signal goes out. A big bank, and they're going to have their branches all around those small towns, but the further you get away, some other node is going to be taken over with those small places, and the closer you get to that other node, you're going to get to eventually the bigger branches of that bank. So this is more of an interaction. So you're going to have more interaction with the radio station if you're close to that tower. The further you get away, you're going to have less interaction, but you're going to start having more interaction with another radio station. Again, this is kind of the airport hubs. The reason all these small airports fly to Minneapolis because that's kind of where it's closer. Okay, this one over here in Spokane, Washington, is going to go to Seattle because it's a little bit closer to it. Okay, as soon as it crosses over kind of into a different region of sorts, that node is going to be pulling it more towards that area. Now, vernacular region, this is the one we did in class where you guys did all activity. When you say the west, the east, the south, the north, that's all perception because to some people it might be the west, but to other people around the world that might be the east. Okay, so this is all just a perception. Usually this has a lot of stereotypes when you talk about the South, when you talk about like the Rust Belt, the Corn Belt, when you start talking about the Heartland. Now you can have the corn region. That would be more of a formal region of the country where everybody there kind of grows corn. But when you start calling in kind of a slang term or derogatory term or to overgeneralize an area, all right, that's going to be vernacular or more perceptional. So when you think about the South, think about Waffle Houses, the voice is changing, all old Confederate states, it gets a little bit muggier there. When you start talking about the Midwest, more of the breadbasket of the world. Remember, these regions can all change. Nobody had 100% accurate on this one because there's nothing that's 100% accurate when it comes to these regions. So you guys broke them down to like 5 or 6 regions, and then on this map here, you can kind of see that's broken down to like 14 or 15 regions. Now, again, the vernacular regions, now this is kind of countries, okay? Now, there's no country of Minnesota Twins. There's no country of Milwaukee Brewers baseball, right? Now, if you go there and measure it and you see kind of the distance further you get away from Milwaukee, you have less fans, that's going to be nodal. If everybody there is a Brewers fan, that's going to be formal, okay? But now when you start kind of making an association or calling it a country or, down here you have Diamondback land or something like that, that's going to be more of a perception. Not everybody there is a Diamondback fan. All right, they don't really control all that territory just in their head. That's kind of where they have their influence. So we have two concepts here. Both kind of go with kind of that nodal type region. That functional region is distance decay. Basically, again, distance decay, the further you get away from something, the less interaction you're going to have with it. Okay, just the further you get away. Now, the reason you're going to have less interaction is because of the friction of distance. Because distance is going to cause friction between the two. Now, why does distance cause friction? A lot of times it has to do with a barrier to cross. It's going to take more time. It's going to take more money. There's going to be more obstacles to kind of get in the way. So friction of distance is the reason why you have distance decay. Okay, just because you're further away from somebody doesn't mean you're going to have less interaction. But because it takes forever to get point A to point B, you're going to have less interaction. If it costs a lot of money to go to point A to visit your friend in point B, you're going to have less interaction, and that's going to be kind of the friction of distance there. All right, so now spatial distribution and spatial association. Pretty common topics we're going to talk about kind of all year. Remember, distribution is just the arrangement of how things are in space. Now, what arrangements? Are we talking clustered? Are we talking dispersed? Are we talking patterns? That's what kind of distribution is kind of the general term. And then density, concentration, and pattern are going to be kind of the three main ones. So remember, density is the frequency. You can have a low density or you can have a high density. All right. On this map here, you can see there's a high density of people in India and kind of the eastern part of China. Whereas you look in northern Africa where the Sahara is, you're going to have less density or less frequency that is in that space. Now, this doesn't mean clustered. This means frequency, how many are in there. They can be clustered or dispersed. It does not matter for density. Now, concentration, where you're talking about spread out, okay, like these houses in these neighborhoods, everything's kind of spread out. Whereas you look in this neighborhood, all the houses are relatively close together. Now, again, keep thinking about the positives and negatives about each of these. Now, pattern, this is the shapes. This is the angles it makes. This is kind of making the rhyme or reason when you look at something. What does it look like? Why is it in that way? Now, the couple that we talked about, these long lots, all right, the reason you're going to see a lot of long lots in these French areas because French colonial people decided that was the best way to divvy up the land, especially on a body of water. So everybody could get a little part of that land, all right? Now, backing up here, kind of the oldest way of doing it in the United States is just by kind of meets and bounds. Basically, you have your tree, you have your river, you have your forest. This is my land. The downside of that, again, is all that stuff can be kind of washed away. It can be chopped down. Somebody can pick up a rock and move it, and they just gain extra real estate. All right. Now, in your textbook, make sure you guys go over the land ordinance. Okay. That land ordinance is kind of what laid out all the land for the rest of the United States. So after the first 150 years, people were here in North America. Once we became the United States, we had the land ordinance, and basically anything that was not already broken up by the French kind of method or the meets and bounds was done by this township and range. Again, this is also a little bit mathematical, right? There's a rhyme and reason to this, and they laid out every kind of square plot of land through the rest of the United States. All right. Now, that does not mean when you look at it today they look like squares. A lot of them do. Okay. But remember, this is a little bit more newer. This is more of the frontier of the United States, more western part of the United States. This is going to be more the eastern part of the United States, where you have the original 13 colonies, where you had Jamestown Pilgrims, all that stuff coming in. They really didn't have all the measurements. They just said, here's my boundary, here's your boundary. All right. Now, once you kind of have all that, again, we're going to kind of go over geographic scale, level of aggregation, geographic scale, scale of analysis. All right, what are you looking at? If I'm going to compare states, I can't compare it to a country. I have to compare state to state, country to country, county to county, or city to city. Okay, so what are you looking at? What is your scale of analysis? Okay, are you going to look at the country level or the local level? Now, spatial association, again, is now taking one idea and trying to find out why it's associated or associated with something. So we have cancer rates here. Why? Because this is where we have a lot of factories. All right. Why is this part of Maryland that actually doesn't have a lot of cancer rates? Why do you have a lot here? Because the Chesapeake Bay, you have a lot of ships coming and going. You have a lot of factories right on the Chesapeake Bay. Now you can look here in Baltimore. When we change the scale of analysis, we get a little bit local. All right, now the reason changes a little bit. Well, kind of the more expensive houses are a little bit further away. So the association, you can kind of say you have more prevalent people, or you have more prevalence of poverty in kind of the Kansas areas than you do the rest of part of kind of Baltimore, which is not really the same reason here. The reason you have it here is this is just where all the factories are. Okay, it's close to the Chesapeake Bay. So when you change the scale, kind of your answer changes as well. Now, a quick review on this one, you can kind of see that all the baseball teams in the 50s were kind of clustered in the Northeast. Okay, and again, this is where the population was. Okay, it was over this part of the United States. Over the years, it kind of moved a little bit. Okay, and it kind of dispersed around the country. Now, you can still call this a cluster here. All right, but you can also say it's clustered, and you can also say it's dispersed. Okay, so if you do see a big cluster at the national level, you can say it's clustered and it's dispersed. All right, now if we change the scale just to the Northeast, you would definitely say it's just simply clustered, because that's kind of what it is. Whereas if you look at the western part of the United States, you're really not going to say this is clustered. You're going to say the western part is a little more dispersed. Again, it all depends on your scale. All right, so globalization. Remember, this is where we had the debate in class here a little bit, kind of in your groups. Remember, globalization, just more interactions in the world when it comes to finances, trade, politics, and then also culture. It's basically the shrinking of the world. The world is much smaller because you can talk to or reach out or interact with more people than you could ever do before. This increases trade, or intends to increase this trade. Now remember, not all parts of the world have been very successful in kind of globalization. It's really helped more developed countries. They've gotten a little bit more wealthier. Developing countries have not really gotten the benefit out of this per se. Now, it was intended to, but they haven't got really the benefit out of it. Now again, the causes why: distance decay. Okay, it was kind of not a reason why it's happening, but that used to kind of prevent globalization. But now we've overcome that with space-time compression, or time-space convergence. Okay, with the reduction of time it takes to communicate and the reduction of time it takes to get to point A to point B, with all our advances in technology for both of those, has basically made the world a little bit smaller. So again, you're compressing the time it takes to cross space. Okay, you're compressing the time it takes to cross the same amount of space as it once did. Now, another reasons for this, we have tariffs. Again, tariff is just a tax on an import coming into a country. Once you start having tariffs or raising those tariffs, prices go up, people buy less. Another reason why globalization is occurring is because these transnational, these multinational corporations, they have factories everywhere. All right, they have a CEO in one spot, they sell items, they try to make a profit. It's not simply just because they're in multiple places, but they all do have factories. They're all trying to make a profit. All right, and to do that, they decide to go into many different countries to try to get the lowest price for each item. Now, some of the effects of globalization, remember placelessness. Every place in the world is kind of having more of a uniform landscape. Everywhere you go now starts having McDonald's, Arby's, stuff that's a little bit more familiar, which means you're losing a lot of the culture, local culture. Now, this is happening in a lot of United States cities, but it's definitely more prevalent in kind of second world or developing countries in the world who are kind of losing their culture because more of a Western or American influence because of all the trading and because of all the culture and all the kind of diffusion of ideas kind of throughout the internet going into their countries. Now, some advantages to this: resources of different countries are used for producing goods that they can do most efficiently. China can make things really cheap for us really fast. Africa has a lot of resources, they're selling them pretty cheap. In the United States, our advantage is we like to actually buy the stuff. Okay, consumers here in the United States and the rest of the world get much more variety. All right, just because it's an American item doesn't mean it's better. Okay, you just simply get more variety, and with more variety now you have cheaper items because they compete. You're going to have cheaper prices. This is why you can go to Walmart, all right, and get a hammer for like $2, as opposed to a couple years ago, not a couple years ago, 20 years ago, that hammer probably would cost $10. All right. Consumers can also buy input goods and services at competitive prices. Basically, anything that goes into China to be manufactured, they can get all those resources pretty cheap, usually from a place like Africa. Now, the downside of this, developed countries are succeeding way more at this than developing countries. Some might say we're actually taking advantage of the developing countries. Another thing is the connection of the world. Think back to the housing bubble that collapsed and impacted the entire world. One country failing, like China, could impact the entire rest of the world. Same thing, thinking about diseases. Because we're more connected to everybody, because we can travel a lot faster, diseases can spread a lot faster than they once could. Now we have technology to kind of combat that a little bit, but at the same time, it can spread a lot easier. And then with competition, smaller companies have a very small chance of succeeding against these global companies who can do things much, much more efficiently and cheaper than they can. All right, now again, remember, diffusion is just simply how something spreads. All right, there has to be a rhyme or reason why places are alike and why they're different. Diffusion helps you kind of, explain that. Now again, diffusion, wherever something starts is a hearth, okay? But when it's first developed, it's just an independent invention, Okay, once you have that independent invention, it can then become a hearth if it spreads somewhere else. So when it spreads somewhere else, somebody might ask, where did it come from? That's the heart, that's the hearth. Okay, now you don't have to have one hearth. When you have many, that's the independent invention all around the world, and it's spread from many of those spots. All right. Now, relocation diffusion, this is more dealing with migration. Somebody actually has to physically move or cross a barrier. Not the person next to you, you're not just moving over to them, but you're crossing a barrier, you're relocating to another spot. All right. Now, having a kind of a bad thing up here, this is not expansion, so kind of ignore that. It's just relocation diffusion. Now, a few of the examples, Spain, when they went to the New World, South America, and Central America, they took the Spanish language with them because they migrated over there. They colonized that area. Therefore, those people are now speaking Spanish when they came across. English is spoken in the United States because you have a lot of English colonies or colonial people who came from England to the United States. They brought that language with them. Now, we're not talking about forcing it on the Native Americans. We're talking about they just brought that language to this land, and that's why you have a lot of people there speaking that language. Religion, same thing. Christianity to the New World. When the Spaniards came, the conquistadors came to the New World, they brought that kind of Catholic Christian faith with them. Islam, here's kind of the spread of Islam. You would not call this really relocation because it's all right next to it. But once they cross the ocean and go to these islands down here, which now becomes modern-day Indonesia, that's going to be relocation diffusion of the Muslim faith throughout that part of the world. Now, contagious diffusion, you want to think disease, you want to think people next to you, you're more likely you're going to get that disease because people are next to you. So that's contagious. It's coming out from one spot here, and the next people most likely to get it are the people nearby. Think of something that goes viral, somebody that puts something online. The next people to kind of experience that are people that are next to the internet, people that have access to the internet. And then those people doesn't have to do it on the internet, but they can spread it to other people around them, the people that have the closest connection to them. This is all about proximity. Think about things that go viral, Ice Bucket Challenge, Mannequin Challenge. Christianity, when it spread through Europe, it started in Italy, then made its way up through Germany, France, Spain, but those were neighboring places. That's not really relocation because they just hit the places that were right next to it kind of throughout. Now, hierarchical diffusion, again, is another expansion. This is more from a power or authority or of influence. All right, so when Oprah has her book club, everybody else kind of goes out and buys that book. They got it from kind of that influence. When you talk about India being under British rule, they kind of carried that English language over there, but the reason everybody in India was starting to speak English because they were kind of forced to under that colonial rule of Britain's power in that area is that, hey, governors, you need to make your people speak English. Village people, you need to speak English or else this is going to happen to you. Right? So when there's power kind of involved or influence, that is going to be more hierarchical. Now, the opposite of this, when you go from small numbers down to big numbers, so small numbers go first, okay, places of least influence have it first, it doesn't mean they're influencing the big areas, it just simply means it started in small nodes, small spots, small places, people with small influence, and then slowly trickled to kind of more popular or places of power or authority. Again, Walmart's a perfect example, started in small towns, then eventually went to big towns. Okay, Culver's started in small towns in Wisconsin, then finally started going to the medium-sized towns, and then to the really big towns. Now, the final one is going to be stimulus diffusion. You need to find one underlying idea, and somebody else is going to take that idea, but they're going to change it a little bit. Right? Now, the example I have here is purple circle. When these people decided to kind of copy me here a little bit, they didn't do it exactly, but they kept purple. They thought that was a good color, but now they're going to change the shape a little bit. All right, so kind of the trend here is going to be purple, okay? It doesn't matter what, it's just simply it's purple. Now we have purple, whatever these shapes are, in a purple circle. McDonald's, when they go elsewhere, the underlying concept is fast food, all right? Or that they're going to make things quick, all right? Now, they're not going to have Big Macs everywhere. They're not going to have sushi everywhere. All right, the underlying idea is simply fast food, more localized, if you will. I was talking about pumpkin, pumpkin spice latte. Now you're going to have places that are going to have pumpkin shakes, pumpkin sundaes, other kind of pumpkin flavored coffees, pumpkin flavored cereal, etc. All right. So we are here on the home stretch here with human environment interaction. This is going to be more of the 1.4. A lot of this we're really not going to go over too much in class here, but sustainability is basically, can you keep something going? Is it sustainable? Environment, is this sustainable to keep doing this? Is your economy sustainable? Sustainability simply means, can you keep it going? But when you talk about environmental sustainability, you need to have these three things kind of down. Is it going to help the environment? all right, or is it going to hurt it? Socially, culturally, do we want this? Do we want this part of our life? Are we okay with this? Okay, if you think pork is sustainable, okay, well, does our culture, is it okay with pork? If we can't have that, well, we're not gonna, it's not sustainable because we're not going to enjoy that. It's not really part of our culture. And then economically, is it affordable? We have technology all over the world that can kind of solve all of our kind of environmental issues, but it's really, really, really expensive. Okay, so we need to have a balance between, is it going to be okay for the environment? Do we socially want it in our lives? Okay, is it going to kind of create us, make everyone a little bit equal? And then economically, can we afford it? All right, you have to have a balance between those. When you have that balance, it is sustainable because you can keep it going. If it's going to hurt the environment, well, eventually we're going to run out of the resources. But it's good for the environment. We love it. All right, socially we like it, but we can't afford it. Then you can't keep that going. That is not sustainable. Now, these two terms, you want to make sure you kind of understand the differences. Conserve, if you think about like the conservatives of sorts, conservatives like to, they still spend money, but they don't like to spend a lot of money. They want to make sure you have a decent flow coming in. That's what conservation is when you come to the environment, okay? You're going to use the environment, you're going to use the resources, but then you might chop down trees, but then you might plant other trees. Or you might put a small quota. We're only going to take this much per year to ensure that we can keep it going. Okay, we're only going to use what we can use. We're only going to use the amount that we can keep replenishing over and over again. All right, we're going to use it, but we're going to replenish it. Preserve basically simply means you're going to keep it the way it is. All right, pristine condition, you're not going to use it all. Hands off, do not touch. So if you remember, preserve is you want to make it preserve, pristine condition. No one can touch it. No one can chop things down. Okay, as soon as you start chopping things down, if you replenish it, it's going to be conservation. If you don't replenish it, all right, it's not going to be either one of these. It's just not really sustainable. So these are kind of two kind of battles people have. Some conserve, okay, it's more like they want to be responsible. Preservation is hands off, don't touch. As soon as you touch it, you're going to destroy it. Now, culture ecology is kind of a fancy term. Just basically, it's the study of how humans have interacted with the environment. All right, some people think the environment really dictates human life. And then on the other hand, people basically think we can change the environment. When the environment tries affecting us, we can change our lives so that the environment's really not impacting us per se. This is actually kind of a really big debate. Some people might say it's kind of controversial and kind of racial stereotypes kind of throughout the world, especially when you look at environmental determinism. Basically, your life is determined by the environment. You didn't choose it. The environment kind of chose this for you, and it explains the way you are. Now, some things that could influence your life: bodies of water, natural disasters, soil, access to animals, climate. This climate's kind of a big one. People usually in really warm areas don't really have kind of a go get them kind of attitude, or that's kind of the belief per se, that they're not really creative. The reason Jamaicans, they kind of say, are kind of laid back is because of the warm weather there. Okay, that's why they just want to relax. They're very chill. Okay, but that's kind of very stereotypical, saying, hey, they can't overcome the weather. All right, but maybe their culture kind of wanted them that way. But if the environment dictates your life, okay, it really changes and makes your culture a certain way. All right, that is the environment determining your life. Now, the other end of this is going to be possibilism. If you think anything is possible, okay, all right, the environment's doing this to us, but we are possibilists, and we can change that. We can make it a little bit better. People in the Netherlands, they only have this green land here kind of above water. So what do? They made all the polders, they made all the dikes there, and they created all this additional land for themselves because anything's possible for them. All right, they didn't just come here and have really, really, really big cities that are very congested. They said, hey, we're going to create more land, all right? We're going to make these dikes so therefore nothing floods it, and then we've created all this other land for farm areas so we can kind of spread out a little bit, okay? This is more creative. They've more have adapted to the area, okay? If this was environmental determinism, it would basically say, hey, these people love living in big cities because the environment, they don't have a lot of land. The ocean kind of pushed them together. That's why they're always fighting with each other, because they're always in big cities. That's why they're always mean to each other. You can kind of think like maybe a New York City attitude of sorts. But they're not. They made all these dikes, they made all these polders, therefore their land is a little bit more spread out than it should have. This is more of a creative approach.